What does a fascist mean? It means you are a far right authorization on ultra analyst political ideology movement characterized by dictator leadership, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition. So I don't know what that means, bro. I swear to God, I don't know what the fuck a fascism is. I don't know what the fuck that is.
This is Villain for All Seasons, Season 2, Episode 2.
I'm Dan.
I'm Andrew.
And I'm Ben. Boys, is it cringe to sig heil at your homie's birthday party?
He did it twice, so I guess if you do it twice, it kind of cancels it out.
I really didn't want to talk about this, but I feel like we have to at least mention it. I don't know, because
It's the biggest news.
People are waiting for us to comment on this, so.
Yeah. Which, by the way, like watching between that and the bishop last week, I was like, okay, the resistance is dead in the water already. Like the left, like the liberal side has already lost the battle because there was all these real things happening right now. Like, and everyone just fell into the trap of talking about Elon Musk doing a very special education Heil Hitler.
A questionable gesture, as some people have called it.
I've heard they were blaming it on his autism.
That's not accurate.
So they're blaming this on him being autistic, right? Or that's why he would do that?
Yeah, it's ableist. If you're questioning it, you're participating in ableism.
So what was he trying to do?
Share his love to the crowd.
Yeah.
Right. Twice.
The official. Yeah. For me, it was the thumping. It was like the, and then like his face, like the irreverence after. He's like, yeah, I just fucking did that.
It's. I think he meant it as like the Roman salute. Right?
Oh, come
Lesson
on,
than
Dan.
Is that a thing?
That's what the Nazis called it.
Yeah, Mussolini did it first. Yeah, so
let's go to the history, because I'm sure the historical context is going to make this sound a lot better.
Yeah.
Let's get to the root.
What was Maddow's analysis? We need to get her on.
I didn't tune in this week.
She did have
the
pastor on. She interviewed the pastor.
Oh. See, to me, that discredits the pastor. I saw the pastor and I was like, cool. All right. That's all like really nice, good things to say.
Yeah.
And now you're doing like the political circuit. Like, don't do that. Just, you said that was your platform. Don't go into the media ring.
Everyone does this. Everyone ruins their moment by trying to hold on to it and stick in and like become like a pundit or have a media career. It's just like, and you lose your maverick status immediately uncool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Ken Bone effect again.
Ken Bone.
Friend of the show.
All roads lead back to Ken Bone.
The Bone Zone.
The no bone zone. Bill O'Reilly joke.
Well, one thing I just want to tag in there is just like this is emblematic of like every evolution of something terrible when it happens, like the buzz around it, and then like the kind of cover that people give to it. Like, it wasn't necessarily what you thought it was. It wasn't what you saw. Why are you overreacting? And then, yeah, maybe he did. It's not a big deal. Also, the reaction of everyone taking still frames on the right, still frames of like public leaders on the left, who are like waving to crowds, and they're like, they did it. Like, no, you kind of got to see the video. Like, if you played the video, it's a very different thing than like taking an out of context still frame. That's what bothered me the most, is like the reaction to the reaction to the reaction.
That's true. Yeah, I mean,
someone needs to formalize the system for understanding how this is going to play out. Maybe that'll help diffuse it.
Wait, so do we actually think it was a Sieg Heil? Do we think it was intentional?
I don't know. It's I guess one of two things is, in the most basic sense, is either it wasn't, and it's just the fact that Musk has like the bodily control of a big fat toddler, which is very likely and very obvious by, when he jumps up and does his stupid X thing, and he bobbles around like a child all the time. So I'm perfectly willing to believe that. Or the more conspiratorial thing, I guess, would be Elon Musk is doing one of his dumb versions of playing three-dimensional chess, where he's doing it to own the libs by knowing that it will upset people and take up oxygen in the room. So everyone's talking about it, and he gets to be like, yes, interesting that all the libs do this when you don't care about Hamas or whatever the fuck. So I don't know. It's equally possible. Either of those. I don't know. At the end of the day, I do not care. I don't think people should have been talking about it at all this week. I mean, like, again, it goes to show the lack thereof of any sense of resistance. Like, there's, ICE detentions happening, Israel breaking ceasefires. Like, there's real problems happening from the Trump administration already, a lot of them actually. And everyone's talking about this fucking idiot and this fucking bishop, and neither of those are important. They're just not.
I do think that Musk had a good point that the so-called libs calls everybody Nazis, and that wad has been shot, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from everybody, the Nazi thing's been overused forever.
Yeah.
And like, you should have problems with Elon Musk for other reasons. I mean, he does have clear fascist tendencies. Ardent Zionist, probably misses apartheid like hell. Has slave labor, wants to crush unions. There's all sorts of fascistic tendencies to him and to Trump without them being literally Nazis. But no one can wrap their mind around fascism anymore unless it has like the iconography of the Third Reich. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to
Yeah.
people's brains, I guess.
I actually think too, there's always like this harkening back to saying, like, this is what fascism looks like, this is what led to the Third Reich. I don't know how useful it is. I just don't understand why we can't judge based on what's happening now. I don't think that you need the historical illusion.
No, it inherently makes it into a really unserious conversation that's really easy to refute. Again, because you rely on the iconography of it so much, it's very easy to dispute that, being like, well, Nazis did this and I do this, and Nazis do
Right.
that and I do
Yeah.
that. So it's very easy to discredit. And it's just a very baby-brained argument when it's like, what, you can name one fascist? Like it comes in many forms. There's all sorts of different versions of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
give me a deep cut.
It's doubly annoying right now that everyone is just racing to the bottom of trying to prove who is the least anti-Semitic, and really that is just has become clearly coded for who's the most pro-Israel. So
Mhm.
I also think anytime you bring the Nazi conversation in, it gets lost in the sauce of this. You prove your bona fides for this sort of thing by being more pro, new genocidal regime.
Are we the YouTubers that led to Trump's victory?
We weren't recording at the time, so we couldn't have.
Yeah, but the seeds of deceit were laid, you know?
Yeah.
The ground movement was there.
I saw this posted on Twitter and looked into it. So this is from Bloomberg, and I'll just read off the headline. The second Trump presidency brought to you by YouTubers. Podcasters including Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn, and Logan Paul are mobilizing America's men to lean right. An analysis of over 2,000 videos show how. So this article, first of all, the title of it really reads like an opinion piece, but when you go into and you actually, it's quite a long article and it's written by like 9 people, and it's going over just how much data they poured through. Obviously, in the title, they say that they listened to watched 2,000 hours of this, and they've been working on this study for like 4 years or something.
2000
And there's
hours
a
of
lot.
Theo Vaughn.
Yeah, and then what is that, like 100 Rogan episodes? But it's basically talking about what's been a big subject on the from the liberal side, which is the so-called manosphere. Okay. So it's specifically looking at Aiden Ross, Andrew Schultz, the Nelk Boys, Logan Paul, Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, Patrick Bet-David, Sean Ryan, and Theo Vaughn. And I know who most of those people are. And Dan, maybe you can help me out here, but it's sort of positing without fully saying that not only does this sphere of male influencers and male podcasters sort of all push the same ideology, but it heavily implies that there's some sort of collusion amongst them, to the point we were joking recently about there's people who say that Joe Rogan has actually become like a psyop and he's part of a CIA Operation Mockingbird type, deep state operative because he, at the 11th hour, endorsed Donald Trump.
No, there was just I agree with what you're saying, and these two paragraphs I think really show how as much research as was done in this article, and it's not a bad article, it's worth a read, I guess, but it shows how it kind of shows like the journalistic bias, and I'm just going to read them aloud. Trump's personality and history are compatible with the program's messaging on masculinity, according to Alice Marwick, director of research at the Data and Society Research Institute. It's like, don't be ashamed of your basely male desires. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty. Don't let anyone take you down, she said. You should be proud and strong, and you should also go after the people criticizing you. Next paragraph. On the shows, hosts connect to their audience using humor and advice and provide a framework for viewers on navigating the world, including their relationships with women, work, and popular culture. They challenge institutions, reinforce old-fashioned gender roles, and glorify men who appear to have fallen out of favor with the public. Insert our Kevin Spacey episode. Ahead of the presidential election, the show's naturally championed Trump, a convicted felon running for president who survived multiple assassination attempts. I mean, you think of people like Lex Friedman specifically.
No.
Yeah, I like Lex. I don't think he would like I don't think he's a champion Trump. To put all these guys together, I think is wrong. I think the premise is wrong. Do you think these people originally on the left and due to the Trump phenomenon have switched over to a more so-called right-wing view of the world?
So are you talking about these podcasts?
Yeah, bringing it back to the podcasters and then also just kind of like a grander their audiences.
Well, in many ways, yeah. First of all, I think a fundamental flaw of the whole thesis of this article is to try and lump all these guys into a coherent ideology, which I don't think you can actually do. I think that's something that's missing with the article is it's really reaching for that, just because they kind of tend to talk about similar man subjects that are around right now. It's like, like some of them are comedians like Theo Von and Joe Rogan. Different guys are into health and fitness. Everybody's overly obsessed on the trans issue right now. So they have some of that kind of stuff going on with it. But to act like it's like the same thing from Lex Friedman to Theo Von, I think is a stretch. And also, I feel like I don't listen to Theo Von, but I feel like clips I've seen of him, he's actually been really good on stuff like Gaza. So I don't know if he deserves to be on this list. Rogan's a specific beast in this, in that he absolutely was further to the left just a few years ago. We know that he endorsed Bernie Sanders, or he didn't like specifically endorse him in the way that he did Trump. But he was like, if I was going to vote for anyone, I would vote for him. And he had him on his podcast. And he got so harangued by everybody in the liberal class about that. Bernie did, by, taking that tacit endorsement and, putting it up on his Instagram or whatever.
Are you talking about like 2016?
Yeah.
Like that time? Okay.
Or maybe it was
it might have been the second time around.
It might have been like 2019 when this happened.
It is interesting. So Bernie went on Joe Rogan. When I first heard that Kamala was going to go on Joe Rogan, but Donald Trump wasn't, I was like, oh, damn, that might actually shift things. And of course, it turned out that she didn't and Trump did. The Democrats don't have likable people. There were a lot of people who did turn down Kamala's appearance because they just thought it was lame and it was bad for their brand to have her on. So it's not that these people are like, oh, only men. It's that you're just fucking lame. Like no one wants to, you're not entertaining. I don't want to have you on. Donald Trump is fucking entertaining. Like say what you want about the guy. He's hilarious because you get to laugh at him. People love him.
Yeah, and this is another thing that I think is really missing from this article's analysis of like, oh, well, all of these, and also like I don't have the quote here, but there is a part where they actually say, oh, their political content skyrocketed in the run up to the election.
Shocker.
Oh my God, what? They started talking more politics right before the US election. Crazy. But this is a thing that's missing from this conversation of this is yeah, it's like, well, they all brought Trump on. And it's like, well, of course they did. There was an election coming up. Trump wanted to be on. He's good content.
Mhm.
Why would you not? It'd be like malpractice not to have him on. It's going to be great for your numbers. It's going to be interesting. He's the most famous person of our lifetime. Why would anyone turn that down? And then the other thing is, yeah, it's not like Joe Rogan repeatedly said that he had asked and wanted to have Kamala on. And it wasn't him going, nope, I'm gonna have Trump, but not her. Her team turned it down. So it puts the lie to this entire argument that these guys all were like working together to get Trump elected when it's like, no, it's either the people that you tried to go to get your brand out there, exactly, Park, didn't want you on, A, because either they're not political podcasts and don't want to be talking about those issues, don't like you, or I don't know, kind of smell the stink on you and know that you're a loser and don't want to be affiliated with that.
Well, she wanted to change the parameters of the Rogan broadcast, right? The recording.
Yeah.
They wanted it to
Yeah,
be an hour, I think.
yeah, like an hour, like 40 minutes or something.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
they
it would have behooved her to do it, I think, because I think she went on Call Her Daddy, which is a huge podcast, but that is the only one of note that I know.
I'd never heard of it. They made a big deal of it. I mean, but again, that's probably primarily like female show.
The
I'm gonna go ahead and
yeah.
say the caller daddy is, and we already knew going into this from like all the polling that this election was going to be a heavily divided by gender election. I'm not gonna say she made no attempt, but I just think they looked at the candidate. They knew she didn't have the tools to go on and actually have a kind of fluid conversation.
yeah.
She seemed utterly incapable of it from an outsider's perspective. Not that that makes you unqualified to be a president, but it certainly makes you unqualified to campaign to be a president.
Mhm.
And that's the world we live in. We just need people who can like talk, who can actually not just like people you say sit down and have a beer with, but people who aren't phony,
Or manufactured.
Yeah.
manufactured phony. Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
same difference to me. But
In my opinion, one of the reasons she didn't go on Rogan is like they couldn't manufacture what they wanted her to say. The conversations are too wide-ranging. She would have had to expose too much of like how she politically thinks, how she personally thinks, which
yeah,
Trump did. I mean, I think he's a liar. He's remarkably candid about some things. But like you said, it felt authentic. And the fact that she turned it down, her team turned it down, made her appear even less real.
well, Joe Rogan would have called bullshit on her on things that he either didn't have the knowledge to call bullshit on Trump or was just handling him with kid gloves because he agrees with most of the
Yeah.
things, whether they're right or wrong.
Not to be too generous to Rogan, but also Trump actually is very, very adept at steamrolling people. So even as you're talking bullshit, like it's very hard to get a word in edgewise. So I can't really blame people for not jumping on it and stopping him
Yeah.
because that's his whole thing.
But yeah, Joe Rogan had, like you said, Bernie Sanders on, and I didn't remember the backlash for Bernie Sanders, and that was mostly because everyone at that point was mad at Joe Rogan for platforming people talking about like anti-vax or something. I feel like that's really when he became radicalized personally. Like he got kind of radicalized and then started like just hating on California, hating on Democrat policies, which I mean, we hate on them too. But also that's when the viewership and like the general sense of him from like a public standpoint, it's like he moved to Texas, he's full Republican, he's like on the other side now. That's what the left does. They ostracize people and then they push them further that direction.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say earlier, get my words around is that I don't think I think he actually was kind of apolitical for a time, but then he got so ostracized by the left that of course it's gonna, and this is what is constantly happening with young men in the country and in the world is that they are being shamed for being men, and it's like, well, why won't they vote for us? They don't like us, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
because you're telling them they're pieces of shit all the time. And where are they going to go? They're going to go to where the party is, where people are going to accept them.
There's two parts here. There's the defining masculinity for like a new generation, and then the entanglement with politics.
I think part of it's that for Joe Rogan, and I think the other one that's really simple is that he got really, really, really fucking rich.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't,
yeah.
I think that that's left out of the conversation all the time when people are talking about how did he swing so far right. It's that he's got worth like what, $250 million now.
Hmm.
And when you have that kind of money, I don't see any other example to the contrary. You're going to be only surrounding yourself with certain kinds of people, which is usually people with that kind of level of money. That's why he likes and is comfortable being around, someone like Zuckerberg or Elon Musk. And that's why he's able to, probably why he wanted to go to Texas is you can go somewhere where you can completely insulate yourself from the outside world, which also makes sense when you are one of the most famous people on planet Earth, insulating yourself. And I think Rogan did that to himself. He started his own comedy club. He basically created his own scene that came and coalesced around him. So he really created a bubble for himself where he really only has to be around people he likes and opinions he likes. So he doesn't have to actually take any noise from the outside world. And of course, that's going to slowly make you crazier and crazier. And obviously, if you're getting advice on politics from fucking Elon Musk, then you're really going to become a fucking moron.
And that's who he said finally pushed him. He's like, well, I was neutral, but I had a great conversation with Elon Musk, and now I'm going to endorse Donald Trump because I think he like really talked to him. He's like, the wise and all powerful Elon Musk convinced me.
Yeah.
Blah, blah,
Well,
blah.
you've
I don't know
seen
the verbiage, but
you can look it up on YouTube. I don't know if it's actually the conversation that did it, but there was a video on YouTube that was like, this is what convinced Joe Rogan to vote for Trump, and
The
it's
super
Elon
gut.
Musk. Yeah, well, it's Elon Musk being like, yes, the Democrats are bringing in illegal immigrants, and they're going to have them voting all over the country, and it's just like
mhm.
absolute nonsense. Like
Yeah,
they're going to take over, and Antifa is going to rule all the courts. Yeah, that's literally what it was.
it's annoying how good you are at that imitation. I think it's a little more complicated than to just say they're pro-Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an odd grouping. I think some of these people are more neutral. I think some of them are like actually like someone like Sean Ryan, I think is kind of like an op. He's like ex-military intelligence. He has a bunch of military people on there. If you've watched, I think we talked about it. You guys don't know Sean Ryan's show, do you?
He's the guy
Yeah.
who just has like Navy SEALs coming on giving like motivational speeches, right?
Yep. But Sean Ryan, yeah, he had and something I do want to get into, or I really want you guys to watch, but it's a huge waste of time, is he brought some guy on to talk about the Tesla bomber. And it's just self-aggrandizing, like, wow, wow. And the deep state's doing that now. Like the way that they just assume the reality of like what the deep state is, and that the deep state is this like cabal of the Democrat or leftists, that idea has been co-opted by the right to such a degree that, and I'm kind of going on a rant now, it's just it allows a space for these conspiracy theorists to be the champions of fighting against this like phantom deep state. Not to say that there's not like actual like hidden motivations in the government and people who aren't accountable. There are plenty of agencies that with black
Yeah.
budgets that do this.
That is a really funny coup of opinion that Trump has managed, is that for some reason the CIA only works with the Democrats and not the Republicans at this point.
It's a way to co-opt like any dissenting opinion.
You're right. I mean, it's this, and conspiratorial mindset has totally been co-opted by the Trump administration, and it's totally a facade, right? It's a lightning rod for them, in my opinion, to just continue typical GOP policies. Yeah.
But their version of conspiracy is so fucking lame and boring. I understand though that they're like, right now we're fighting against like government overreach. We got to get back in there. And this goes into Trump like wanting to like firing all those inspector generals, putting his people in place. It lays the groundwork for this complete revolution of management, for lack of a better word. Just putting your own people in because you can't trust those old people, the last generation of people. But the idea that this new generation of people is going to be any less biased. Sorry, another sort of tangent. It's the idea of Elon Musk is now the leader of Twitter X. Like he owns that. So therefore, everything that's happening is good and safe. Before it was terrible because people were getting shadow banned and blocked and we didn't have freedom of speech. But now that he's there and nothing really changed, if anything, he just tweaked the algorithm to like boost a little more right wing content. We're good. Like the same practices are there, but they're helping us. They're helping our voices. So we're good. I know I diverted it so we can just go back to kind of the base article.
Who are the Nelk boys, by the way?
I I have no idea.
I actually hate saying that.
It just makes me think of the way I used to say milk when I was growing up in Minnesota.
Maybe that's why they call it that. They know how uncomfortable it makes people.
It's a gross word, anyway.
Yeah. We need to get the Nelk boys on.
Yeah, the Nelk Boys I think are just kind of like a bro podcast. Like I think they're similar to like a Logan Paul type thing, where it's that's
Oh,
another hilarious thing from this article where they're talking about the things that'll be discussed, and it's like they will talk about politics, health and fitness,
women
comedy,
troubles.
and pranks. I want to hear Lex Friedman talking about pranks.
Lex Freeman is such an outlier for this because he actually has like really good guests
Mhm.
and he doesn't have a political bent. Like I watch the show all the time and he does like he wants to go to Russia and interview Putin and Zelensky. I think he maybe already did Zelensky. Yeah, he did Zelensky. But he's more of an intellectual of this entire group. Some people have backgrounds where I think this Patrick Bet David guy is just a complete ideologue, like piece of shit.
Oh yeah, complete charlatan.
This Aiden Ross guy, by the way, is the one who gifted Donald Trump a Cybertruck with a like vinyl picture of him printed on the side of had a photo of him when he was shot and blood on his ear.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Can Trump drive?
Cool.
He's a New Yorker.
Trump
No,
has
he's
never
always had
driven.
drivers. Yeah,
No,
no,
no
he's not
way.
one of us. Aiden Ross, there's a hilarious clip, and we should insert this or something, of him trying
Hmm.
to pronounce authoritarianism. The Andrew Schultz podcast with Joe Rogan, I thought was great. Trump looked great on it, and Andrew Schultz did a great job of just like kind of calling bullshit. He's just like, "Oh, come on," and they like laughed at him when he would say like ridiculous shit. But I think that's like the most unbiased you could possibly get. I don't think they probably didn't endorse him. He called him out on the abortion thing. Yeah.
Did you
Big ups to Andrew Schultz.
did you watch Trump on Theo Von?
No.
Yeah, where they talked about cocaine.
Yeah, yeah.
It made him look so likable.
It really did. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't really care for Theo Von's format, but I think it really benefited Trump.
Theobald's hilarious. I like his little shorts and reels.
Yeah.
I like him in the clips that I see him. And again, I think like he had Gabor Mate on talking about
Yeah.
Gaza. He's talked about Gaza a lot, which I really respect.
He related it to the TikTok issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why again, I think like the whole thesis of this article doesn't really make any sense to me because all of these individuals are so different. And aside from some really cosmetic similarities in who they have on, which again, like of course they have the similar kind of people on. There's a finite amount of famous people. And also, you know, if they're comedians, these guys run in the same circle. I mean, they actually make a point of mentioning this in the article that it was like Shane Gillis has been on three of the show or three of the podcasts. And it's like, what crazy that other comedian who's friends with all those guys was on multiple
That's a
podcasts with them.
circuit.
This is what we call a conspiracy. I guess, you know, we don't have to stay on it too much longer, but to what end does an article like this actually accomplish anything? I guess would be my
That
question.
was my thought.
Aside from the obvious ongoing, let's find anyone possible to blame but ourselves coming from the liberal class. Because it can't be liberal pundits, it can't be liberal commentators or journalists, it certainly can't be Democratic politicians. So it's got to be someone, not only the fact that, people like Rogan and Andrew Schultz and Logan Paul are popular and they're not. I think that goes into it too, of just they don't like that people like these people and don't listen to, whatever stupid ass podcast Bloomberg media is churning out.
It's so I'm thinking of the Bloomberg, the people who are reading this article. There's no possible way that so this is a huge data dump just to get people who read Bloomberg to understand what this culture is all about, this like circuit is all about. And I think it's one, not necessarily true, but it's like an anthropological force by data. And it's very misleading. I'm just thinking about the type of people who are reading this and how they could possibly come to some actual conclusion about what this is. And this article isn't going to like help anyone. If anything, it's going to like reinforce this falsehood that the manosphere is this homogenous place where our youth is being corrupted.
Yeah, do you think Aiden Ross is
Yeah,
going to read this and like have like a road to Damascus moment about, all of his subject and content?
all of his
Big Fuentes.
his praising of Andrew Tate. Yeah, that's a good point though, Park. It's like also when you read this article, a thing that really struck me was actually the graphics on it. After the first two paragraphs, you get this graphic that has all these little screens. It really reminds me of the surveillance device from The Dark Knight, that
Yeah.
they had in the Batcave of where it's all of these different things of their podcast, and then just graph after graph of useless information. You have most guests aren't political pundits or politicians, so you have like these pie charts for each one of these podcasts and showing the proportion of the kind of person that's on it. It's like Aiden Ross has mostly influencers, Joe Rogan has mostly comedians, Lex Friedman as mostly intellectuals. And it's just like absolute first of all, the thing I thought about, with the amount of people that have their names on this article and the amount of graphs and, data-driven
Mm-hmm.
analysis, the thing I can't stop thinking about is A, how much money went into writing this absolute drivel. And especially for the point that it's like it doesn't seem to have like a thesis statement to it.
Yeah. And as a designer, I can tell you right now, this is just a lot of window dressing to make it look more analytical than it probably actually
Yeah.
is. This is would not stand up in like an academic setting.
These people are clearly being grouped into the Trump base, and it almost makes it seem if the point of the article is like the manosphere is just inherently Trump. Like, unless you are pro-Democrat, it feels like you are being labeled
Oh,
Trump here, or you're being labeled pro-Trump. And I think it's funny that like as Villain for All Seasons, we're three guys talking about this stuff. Like we're probably going to get that same label.
what, that were inherently Trump?
For MAGA.
Oh, is it sad that they didn't put Ben Shapiro in as the manosphere? Is he not masculine enough because he likes dry pussy?
Oh, I didn't even think about that. He must be so bummed.
There was another one I thought was,
He grew the beard out and everything. He got hair
Nice.
plugs for his chin.
yeah, I mean, like Peterson's not on there. I guess he's kind of his own thing, but
Yeah.
all right, all right. Who wants to read this one? Can we do that as a gut reaction?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah. House Resolution 26 deeming certain conduct of members of Antifa as domestic terrorism and designating Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. That bill was put forward by Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican, Georgia District 14, designating a phantom group of people who also were a large part of the January Sixers. I don't know if you guys remember
They
that
organized
one.
it.
They're now terrorists. So they organized Jan 6, big pro pardon for Jan 6, but now we should probably put them on the terrorist watch list.
They're gonna have a hard time prosecuting this organization because it doesn't fucking exist. This drives me so insane. And it is kind of like one of the greatest pieces of right-wing propaganda that I think has come out in the last several years is they'll be like, what was the big one? It was like them talking about Antifa had like taken over Portland or whatever. It's like Antifa is like a loose idea at most, like that people like attach themselves to. It is not a centralized organization. There are no card-carrying members of Antifa. There's no Antifa headquarters.
They wish
But
there
like
was.
it's
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
your
I'd
card just
join
got
it.
lost in the mail.
But it's been this talking point forever, just for dumb people to be like, well, Antifa did it. It was like they're not a thing. They're not a real thing. It's like people who think that like Anonymous was a real organization and not just like probably some poli-sci major who runs a really shitty YouTube page.
I mean, yeah, QAnon fell off.
Boogaloo Boys fell off.
Antifa thing fell off. Just Hawaiian t-shirts are out, so that whole movement
Yeah.
died.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, I guess, let her have her fun. You know,
It's definitely.
Do you think
sad
it's going to
for
go anywhere?
politics.
I mean, they can pass it, but like again, it's not a organization. It's not real.
What's
Thing
going
that people
yeah,
put
but
on pins.
oh yeah. Well, so what?
Well, I mean, okay, so like scary version, what bad can come of it, I guess, is yeah, you can attach like a terrorist label
Yeah.
to people participating in left-wing protests or even right-wing protests. But like that,
Mhm.
I don't know, that happens anyway already. Like they're already doing that with being pro-Palestine makes you pro-Hamas, makes you ISIS, basically.
Oh,
You
Not
can
eligible for a job.
I think this categorization though thing, it is important in terms of like legally what the government can do. And I don't know if you guys remember back in the Snowden days, like, a lot like God, this was horrible rhetoric too. It's like, well, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to be scared about. It's like, no, fundamentally, it's in the Constitution. It's unconstitutional for you to surveil us like this. And we talked about it last week. The joke is like there's just like an FBI or CIA like desk at Facebook and Twitter and all these other like social media companies where they're just like constantly tapping. They share the servers essentially. They have like full access. They have like a back door. I think that's all like very reasonable and rational. They were going to do it anyways. Like they've been wiretapping. But now I think it gives at least one political party a rationale to out and out be like, we're prosecuting these people, we're finding these people, the Luigis of the world, the freedom fighters. I think it's going to give them carte blanche to do the things that are terrifying. This is disturbing that it's even proposed because of the reason that it is a phantom organization that is ill-defined. That's what bothers me.
There's already an
Mhm.
announcement that they're going to reinvestigate January 6th. So I'm sure there's some dovetailing with this proposal and the reinvestigation.
That's interesting. I understood that as they just want to figure out a way to blame Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, like that counter narrative that they allowed it to happen. So,
Yeah.
but that what you said is more interesting. I like that they're going to be like, see,
All right, so boys, what are your thoughts on this? Hans Zimmer officially hired to make Saudi Arabia national anthem.
oh, dude, we can't let it happen.
Yeah.
Is he American
Uh,
I thought he
or
was
is he
German.
German?
yeah. No,
Okay.
I mean,
Is
is this a W or an L? I can't tell.
It's
If
a
you're
huge
Hans,
fucking W.
For Saudi, I think it's
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's a god tier alpha move.
yeah, he is German. Okay, they have no morals, famously.
The
I
rest
think
of
we
us,
should sanction Germany over this.
the rest of us are just saddled with our shitty old national anthems that we can't change, and these guys are just like rewriting the rule book.
It is going to be amazing. It's going to be the
Yeah.
best national anthem on the
It's going to
planet.
bring everyone to tears.
I was assuming it would just be like the soundtrack to Dune 2, but like
Okay.
tighter.
So it's a thumbs up for Hans, right? Or is it?
Everyone sells out to the Saudis eventually.
Yeah, it's true.
Once
It's
our
true.
deal goes through, I can't critique.
I'd say thumbs down to Hans, thumbs up to the Saudis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one for us. Mel Gibson hails Trump's return to California. It's like daddy arrived and he's taking his belt off. There's been so much daddy Trump language.
That's one way to admit that you've experienced child abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Roseanne Barr has that rap, Daddy's Home.
So this, what?
Yeah, Roseanne Barr has a rap called like Daddy's Back, maybe, or Daddy's Home, talking about Trump.
Okay. So this all started with Tucker Carlson gave a speech at like, I don't know, the GOP like convention or something, right? The RNC.
Is that where it's from?
I know Tucker Carlson, it first came out with Tucker Carlson. And
Okay.
I thought people laughed at it sufficiently to where it wouldn't be repeated, but apparently it's like taking off.
This is so embarrassing.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this has been it's not new because this has been the case. He's portrayed as this sort of ultra masculine object when he's just always been anything but. There's not, he's always just been this very queeny New York socialite type. So it's never really made sense. And like the people have always tried to shoehorn on this sort of ultimate alpha persona onto Trump, and it doesn't make any sense. And then I don't know, I guess like his Trump's always to me kind of had like, yeah, he's been like a queen. He's kind of had this sort of, I don't think Trump's gay, but he sort of has the affect of like a drag queen. And it seems like that is just rubbing
Mm.
off on everyone else now. Now he's daddy and he's taking off his belt. And we know, Mel Gibson's really into torture scenes, so it's
I forgot about that South Park episode.
all
So
comes
good.
full circle. Yeah.
Oh, don't choke me with this belt.
Are you guys cool if we end with an op or not?
Yeah, I would love to.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd like to introduce a new segment called Op or Not, which is basically looking at stories from the day and asking, is this real or is this a psyop from the deep state?
To me, this is 100% an op.
Biden forever. Haitian gang member shouts, fuck Trump. Thanks, Obama, as he's detained by feds. A lot to unpack here. I just want to say the screenshot is from Fox News.
Famously, very
Okay, you know what this reminds me of is remember when like the caravans were coming to America like nonstop, but the Biden regime they gave them T-shirts that would say like Biden Kamala on them.
I forgot about
This
that.
is super funny. I don't believe a thing.
Wait, so he's saying Biden forever, fuck Trump, but
Mhm.
then he's also saying thanks, Obama?
Yeah. He's definitely reading off a script.
What are this imaginary Haitian man's values? How can you be? Oh, I mean, yeah, op, but I don't think that's a deep state op. I think that's a Fox News op.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
It's just a new initiative by Trump that led him to get arrested. It says Fox News filmed several illegal immigrants being arrested by ICE in Boston.
Well, actually, that brings up an important question. Like, obviously, Biden had more deportations than Trump. Obama had more deportations than Trump. But was this ICE facilitating the deportations?
It's a good question. It's ICE didn't go away. Like ICE was
Right.
still there. They still had funding. They were still an agency. The quote is actually better than the headline. Fuck Trump. You feel me? Yo, Biden forever, bro. Thank Obama for everything that he did for me, bro. I'm not going back to Haiti. Charged locally with rape.
That's so bad. When they when they listed out all everything that he's been charged with the crime. Yeah, again, like I think if you're a Trump voter, you're loving this.
Yeah, that's not a deep state op. That's not a deep state op. That's pure Fox News. Yeah, just this what Haitian gang member, rapist, child murderer. The op would be he becomes like a sleeper cell progressive congressman.
Why is the
Yeah.
window down? Why there's a lot of things here that just don't add up. Why'd they slow the car down so he could scream at the camera?
Totally, totally.
This doesn't just happen. So yeah, low hanging fruit.
So this week we interviewed Vijay Prashad. Vijay Prashad is an Indian historian and journalist, author of about 40 books, including Washington Bullets, which we talked about in the episode. At the very end, listen up for that one. Red Star over the Third World, the darker nations of people histories of the Third World, the poorer nations, a possible history of the global South, and the withdrawal, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, and the fragility of U.S. power, written with Noam Chomsky. We also talk about Vijay's new book with Noam on Cuba. Vijay is definitely one of our best interviews. Really, really knowledgeable guy.
Yeah, it's a really fun interview. It's he Vijay's just got an amazing point of view and an amazing wealth of knowledge, and a really a great sense of humor about some really grim topics. I think he lends great perspective and great insight, especially when we're talking about, the future of Palestine, which is, not the most positive outlook at the moment right now. But I think VJ had some very insightful and sober words for it.
VJ, thank you so much for joining Villain for All Seasons. I'm Dan. I'm with
I'm
Ben.
Ben.
What a great name for a podcast. Podcast villain of all seasons. What kind of name? Amazing.
Well, we could tell you actually that came
Yeah.
from a description of I'm sure you're familiar with Philip Agee, the CIA whistleblower tell-all novel. Yeah, when he went public with his first book, Inside the Company, I think it was the New York Times or the New Yorker lambasting him, described him as a villain for all seasons. So I thought that had a good ring to it.
That's a great story and well played for saying either the New York Times or the New Yorker, because I mean, what does it matter really, right?
Yeah,
What
birds of a
does it
feather.
matter? Well played, yeah. Birds of a feather, exactly.
Yeah,
They flock together at Upper East Side dinner parties,
yeah, both arms of the same deep state. So does it really matter?
VJ, I just want to kick things off and ask what your favorite part of the inauguration was.
Right, right. None, because I actually didn't watch it. It's interesting. I really there are some things you do in life, and there are some things you don't do. Things you don't do is watch boring things like inaugurations, even speeches. Just get the headlines from Reuters or whatever later, frankly. Very little is learned from me. For me, I know that people have to watch these things to get signals and so on. I watched that clip, of course, of Trump and Vance sitting there. I guess it was a prayer breakfast, and the priest saying stuff. And I watched that only because I saw Trump's tweet later saying the so-called bishop, and I said, oh, I must watch that. That's interesting. Look, it's a miserable situation. Yeah. And what is this? I mean, this is the third term of Trump. So what inauguration? Biden, was that a term? I thought that was the second term of Trump.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that, VJ?
Yeah, so let's take the issue that is very meaningful to me. The U.S. embargo or blockade of Cuba. U.S. blockade of Cuba starts, in the 1960s, continues all the way through, and then the United States government twice puts it on the U.S. State Department's list of state sponsors of terrorism, which Cuba is not. It's a state sponsor of healthcare and many other things. Certainly not terrorism, unless you consider healthcare to be terrorism, which I suppose some elements in the United States might. But Trump, right at the end of his first term, puts Cuba on the state sponsor of terrorism list, right toward the end. And Biden actually ran for office saying that he was going to improve relations with Cuba, which was interesting. He said that a number of times. When he came into office, his spokesperson at the time made several comments saying Cuba is not on our agenda. Well, but you said you were going to improve relations. Trump did put Cuba on the states. You can remove, for 4 years, you could remove it. No, Biden kept Cuba on the state sponsor of terrorism list. Right before he leaves office, he removes it, knowing full well that Trump's going to put it back on the list the first day. So where was there a Biden term? It was a Trump term. That's one example. We can go through legions of examples. We can talk about deportations. Was there a significant drop in deportations during the Biden era? Did Mr. Biden improve relations with China during his period? No, he maintained all of Mr. Trump's harsh policies against Chinese trade, and in anticipation of Trump 3, which is going to deepen it. Did Mr. Biden operate differently regarding Israel? Mr. Trump had pushed the Abraham Accords. Mr. Biden completely participated in a genocide against the Palestinian people. Trump comes in part 3 and says, hey, I'm going to shut it down. But he brings in an ambassador who believes that, Jerusalem is part of Israel and so on. I mean, really, in what quantifiable way, from my perspective, things I am worried about, foreign policy, et cetera, immigrate, where was there a big departure in the so-called Biden years? Where was the big departure? Seems to me like he just carried forward the Trump situation. Why did he have to wait till the last day to provide clemency to Leonard Peltier? Why didn't he just do that on his first day? Leonard is not going to even leave the prison in Florida till February 18th. Why didn't he just do this the first day? He didn't even pardon him. Yeah, he pardoned his own son. Okay, that seems Trumpian to me. That's something that Mr. Trump would do, is pardon his kids. Biden did that. What's the difference, man? I'm not getting it. I get it that liberals are super upset now and they say, oh my God, Trump is back. How are we going to survive these 4 years? Ask the Palestinians how they survived this last period. Take a conversation with them.
Well, speaking on that, I mean, obviously, I agree with you that I can't really see an effective difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, aside from maybe how the policy is presented. As you probably remember, Biden famously said regarding immigration that I will adopt Trump's policies, but I will never adopt his rhetoric. What do you see changing, developing, staying the same? All of the above in regards to Palestine under the Trump administration?
See, first thing is that this ceasefire is 3 weeks. Okay, it's not a permanent ceasefire. There are phases. This is a very, very carefully worked out agreement, which was on the table from March. Okay, if not May. I mean, there's a debate. In May, it apparently seemed like everybody had agreed. Okay, if Biden had pushed hard in May and said, I'm not giving you any more bombs, you might have had the agreement in May. That would have meant a lot of human beings still alive. Okay, from May till January is a very long period of time when you're seeing hundreds of people being affected a day by this. And I mean dead and injured, not just starving and cold, but, dead and injured. So, yeah, this is a 3-week pause, and then we're going to have to see. It's very clear that Mr. Trump is a hardball guy when it comes to the Middle East. It's very clear his hardball is against the Arabs. It's not going to be against Mr. Netanyahu. He may not like Netanyahu. He did a funny thing. He tweeted that clip from Jeffrey Sachs where Sachs basically abused Netanyahu. But look, frankly, Trump is clever. He wants to keep his options open. He wants to make Netanyahu think that, he's calling the shots, not Bibi Netanyahu. That's about masculinity and power. That's not necessarily about Trump with distance from Israel. Netanyahu is not Israel. Okay, let's not substitute Netanyahu for Israel. Trump has never attacked Israel. He may have attacked Netanyahu. That's different. Netanyahu is a jerk. Trump is a jerk. That's what they do to each other. That's different from attacking Israel. He's never had any daylight. Okay, his appointments don't indicate at all. There's no Arabist among his appointments. He is going to represent a view even in the Arab world, which is against Iran, which is against Hamas one way or the other, the Muslim Brotherhood. He is playing hard, man. He's a tough Bazari negotiator. He belongs in that world in a little way, So I don't see this as necessarily or at all good for the Palestinians. This is not the case. I mean, no American president has been good for the Palestinians. Sometimes they have soft feelings for the Palestinians before they become president. The example is Obama. And sometimes after they leave the presidency. The example is Jimmy Carter. But during the presidency, nobody has really come out there and had an Arabist view, at least since 1967. It is true, in an earlier period, there was much more sympathy in some ways for the Saudi position and so on, when the United States was effectively building up the petrodollar as an instrument, which happens really after around 1967, around the time of the 67 war. But, frankly, it's not going to be great. I mean, I don't know what concessions Mr. Trump is going to insist that the Palestinians and then the Arab groups around Palestine, the neighboring countries, what concessions they make. I mean, if I was the Trump administration, I would put the squeeze immediately on Syria to cut a peace agreement with Israel. And I would put the squeeze on a very weakened Lebanon and say peace agreement with Israel. And then Israel is at peace with all its neighbors, delimits its boundaries. Palestinians stuck. That's what I think Mr. Trump is going to do. The Abraham Accords were a step towards isolating countries like Lebanon, Syria, and so on. And the overthrow of the Assad government and the entry of a basically pro-Western, pro-Turkish government is really going to allow Trump, if he's smart, to push on Beirut and Damascus to cut a deal, and that is going to be really, really difficult for the Palestinian question, because then Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon would have peace agreements with Israel, and the Palestinians would have no near allies. The nearest ally is Iraq and Algeria and so on, but too far away, to be honest.
Vijay, what does that mean for the Palestinians if that were to happen?
Yeah, it would be terrible. I mean, then the issue of global solidarity would be very important. The issue of the Palestinian diaspora would have to be raised at a much greater level. I mean, I'm speaking to you from Santiago, Chile. 500,000 Palestinians live here. This is a country of 18 million, so 500,000 is a lot of people. They will have to put much greater pressure on this government, the governments of Gustavo Petro in Colombia, and so on. This is going to require a lot of international pressure. The Chinese are going to have to come in and play a bigger role. I mean, Israel has played its hand in this genocide pretty deftly. It has faced sanction and censure from most of the global south. Its highest leaders have been indicted by the International Criminal Court. But look at the situation. Mr. Netanyahu has an ICC warrant. Tomorrow they might be in Damascus signing a deal with the Syrians. I mean, this is outrageous. What is the punishment for having conducted a genocide? Peace agreements with your neighbors. It is outrageous. But this is the reality. And we should not start from a position of your feelings or what you would like to see. These are the hard-boiled realities. Iran's role is weakened in the region. This is bad for Palestine. Iran was a great defender of the Palestinian cause. I listed already Iraq, Algeria. Yeah, these are big state defenders of the Palestinian cause. People's solidarity is going to increase. I don't know how the Syrian population, how the Lebanese population will react, I mean, but if the Egyptian population is any measure, they won't do anything. I mean, in Egypt, popular sentiment for Palestine is at 90%. The government has a peace deal. What do the people do? They can't seem to move against their government. Popular sentiment, polls done by all kinds of independent people saying 90% support for Palestine in Egypt. Let's say it's exaggerated. Let's bring it down to 75%. Yeah, that's way more than in most countries. And yet the government doesn't lift a finger to help the Palestinians. So is that the future for the Syrians, for the Lebanese? That is a catastrophe for the Palestinian people.
On his way out, I think it was either Jake Sullivan or Anthony Blinken mentioned that they view the policy of Israel towards Gaza and their entire Gaza policy as a positive. And I think in his final sentence said that they're still optimistic that the Saudi deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel will still happen, which I think the reason, even the talk of this deal, was probably the reason for the Hamas attack on October 7th. Can you talk about what the Saudi position is now, since they historically have been the defenders of Palestine?
Well, firstly, Saudi Arabia is going through a lot of changes under Prince Mohammed bin Salman. When he first came to office, he basically cut out the deal within the country of sharing power across all the Al Saud cousins and family members. The Sodari Seven and their descendants had shared power. And he basically cut people out, bought them out, threw them out, and centralized power around himself. Secondly, he invited many of them, but also other rich Saudis to a hotel. It was an invitation, like a mafia invitation. They were all put into hotel rooms, including a man for whom I used to work, who used to own Twitter, as it turns out, and they put them into different hotel rooms in this hotel, and he basically browbeat them and said, you have to invest your money in Saudi Arabia. You can't hold it all in London and in New York and so on. And he forced them to put their money into Saudi 2030, a plan that McKinsey wrote for him. It was a big document. You can download it online to build new cities and so on in Saudi Arabia to pivot away from reliance on oil, fossil fuels. So he is a very ambitious guy. After his failed war against Yemen, he sort of calmed that down at a point, accepted the Chinese invitation to talk to the Iranians, understood that, the future of the world economy was in Asia and not in the Atlantic world, began to pivot away from the United States. It's a very interesting set of developments taking place in Saudi Arabia. Well, then the United States, feeling anxious that Saudi Arabia, went to Beijing to sit with the Iranians, there was a handshake agreement and so on. The United States at the G20 meeting in Delhi had a side meeting and made an announcement for an India, Middle East, Europe corridor. That was what it was called. Now, this was an interesting announcement. It came as a bit of a surprise to a lot of people, but it had been in the works for a while. The idea of this corridor is to compete with the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese. The problem for the US is that it just doesn't have the surplus capital to compete with the Chinese. I mean, the Chinese built a $3.6 billion port in Peru, in Chanque in Peru. The United States went to the APEC meeting then. Biden announced that the US was first going to sell, but then because it was embarrassing, give the Peruvians used Caltrains cars, locomotives and passenger cars from California train service. Used cars were donated to Lima's metro system. It's very embarrassing. I mean, $3.6 billion and then the gift of sort of used metro cars. So when the US constructed this deal with India, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, and some European countries, the idea was the US puts nothing on the table. These countries put their own money on the table. The US brokers this deal. Well, to compete with the Belt and Road, it was going to start in Gujarat in India. The 2 or 3 ports were going to be part of this. They were going to be a corridor to Dubai, free trade zone, enter Dubai port, go through Dubai into Saudi Arabia, go up the Saudi peninsula into Israel, and then from the port of Haifa to Greece. So this, when it was announced, there was no fanfare, was a de facto recognition by Saudi Arabia of Israel. Not a de jure one, because they haven't had a handshake and a signature and an actual formal recognition. But if you're going to allow goods to traffic through Saudi Arabia into Israel, that's a de facto recognition of Israel and its right to exist and so on. So this was a big deal. This was even bigger than the Abraham Accords, and you're right. 2 days later, Hamas strikes. Yeah, so maybe it was in reaction to this. Now, the problem is, during this 500-day attack by the Israelis on the Palestinians, a investment group in the US released a report they call a Hindenburg Group, about an Indian business, the Adani family business, owned by Mr. Gautam Adani, who's a very close ally and friend of India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Well, the Adani Group responded very strongly to the Hindenburg report, which basically said there's a lot of cronyism happening and a lot of falsification of information about Adani's industrial empire. You're wondering why I'm bringing this up, but just give me a minute. Then this was taken up by the Financial Times, which did an even more in-depth exposure, and Adani's company lost a lot of money. Now, when the deal, the G20, at the G20, when the deal was announced about this India, Middle East, Europe corridor, what a lot of people weren't paying attention to is that the port in Gujarat, the main port, is owned by Mr. Adani. Mr. Adani owns the port of Haifa in Israel. He owns the port of Haifa. He has a lease on it. And he owns the port in Greece, where this was going to end up. So, in fact, this was an India, Middle East, Europe corridor, but also it was kind of an Adani corridor. because he was going to benefit hugely. And by the way, the port in Dubai is partly owned by the Chinese, but nobody talked about that. Separate issue. So in this interim, Mr. Adani has taken a big hit. So I'm not sure if this India, Middle East, Europe corridor can be easily recovered in the shape that it was proposed. Because I don't think Mr. Adani can go to capital markets to raise the kind of funds he needs, given the hit he's taken from first Hindenburg and then the Financial Times. Now, that means that this will have to be somewhat reconstructed. India might have to come out of this. The port of Haifa, well, the Israelis may be very keen to normalize. So they may want to put their own money in. I don't know where they're going to get the money from. The US doesn't have the money sitting around. Yeah. So they may have to reconstruct the actual route. The map might change. But I'm not actually confident, given the hit that Adani has taken, that this is going to be so easy to revive. I know that at Davos last year, January of last year, Saudi foreign minister said that if the Israelis agree to stop bombing the Palestinians, we'll cut a deal with them. He made that promise last January at Davos. But the Israelis didn't respond because they were confident that the Saudis will come back anyway. And that also scares me. But the fact is, what you just mentioned is not so easy. It's not like the Saudis hit a switch and the India, Middle East, Europe corridor just starts again. The principal finance may not be available. And the US just doesn't have the money to underwrite anything. They could perhaps send old ships, but I don't think old ships are part of this deal.
Vijay, I want to hear your thoughts on what you think happens to Netanyahu now that even though it's a temporary ceasefire, what do you think happens to him? And if you think the ceasefire will last beyond the 3 weeks?
Firstly, I hope it lasts, okay? I really, really hope it lasts because this is insane. I mean, next week we are coming out with some information about loss of life and so on in Palestine. It's horrendous. You don't even need numbers. Everybody knows it's horrendous. The UN has just come out with a statement saying, $80 billion is the minimum rebuilding. And that I think is a ridiculously low number. It's going to take years. And I don't know, UNDP, the development program, signed a deal with the University of Venice to design the new Gaza. And they want to start with a kind of what they call a nucleus city of 50,000. 50,000. There are 2.3 million people there. What 50,000 city? There's no time to build some glorious Venetian city there. You're going to have to create housing. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. People are not going to leave Gaza with the promise that they can return because they think, well, this is a permanent Nakba, permanent catastrophe. They'll never be allowed to return. Mr. Trump has already indicated phenomenal real estate, he said, phenomenal property. Yeah. That's what he said. It's a great line.
That's how he
phenomenal
sees everything.
Property. Yeah. And, he's a real estate guy. And by the way, it is phenomenal. It's on the Mediterranean. What could be better? Beautiful property. Yeah, but it's owned by the Palestinians and them already refugees. The Palestinians on average moved about 19 times during this 500 days. Okay. It's incredible. They had to keep moving, There's millions of people moving multiple times. It's insane. Now, where to go? It's all flattened. 90% of housing has been destroyed. Where to go? It's crazy. The ceasefire has to hold. I mean, I'm saying this as an imperative. I don't really care what I think analytically. I don't want to analyze this. I think it just has to hold. If it doesn't hold, it's a catastrophe. It must hold. I don't know what it means to say it won't hold. Netanyahu is a survivor. I mean, he has survived. He's the longest serving prime minister of Israel in its history since 1948, right? He's a survivor. These right-wing groups that leave and say, I don't like this and all that, he has always found somebody to come back and make the coalition. Where are these right-wing forces going to go? What right-wing alternative do they have? End of the day, even if he goes, it's going to be a right-wing government in Israel. There is no alternative. Netanyahu's future is less important than the future of Israel. Yeah, Israel is just gone to the right. We were complaining earlier, Trump 1, Trump 2, Trump 3, there was no Biden. But in the United States, there is still an observable liberal section, an observable center left, an observable left. you can still see these elements. Every once in a while, Bernie Sanders will wake up from his slumber and say something quite positive. Every once in a while, Alexandria or Ocasio-Cortez will say something or the other. I'm not saying all the time, but once in a while. You have a very good guy running for mayor of New York. All I'm saying is that in Israel, it's not visible. There is no liberalism visible. There is no center left. Forget it. Labor is long gone. All of that. Yeah. So whether it's Netanyahu, he goes to jail, who cares? Yeah. For some corruption thing, some, construction on his home or genocide. I don't care about his welfare. I would say that whoever comes is basically Netanyahu. Marx writes in the 18th Brumaire that the class struggle gets so intense sometimes it puts up, and this is in the English translation, it puts up a grotesque mediocrity. But in fact, I would revise the line for Marx and say when the class struggle is intense for a long period of time, you'll have a string of grotesque mediocrities. And they are grotesque because look at what they do. I mean, look at what Biden did. Kept sending 2,000-pound bombs to Israel. Grotesque, but then also grotesque to define the mediocrity. He's not just a mediocrity, he's a grotesque mediocrity. He's like unbelievable mediocrity. So goddamn mediocre and uninspiring. Yeah. Netanyahu is uninspiring. Like, how could anybody be inspired by him? He's a mediocrity, grotesque mediocrity. A gangster, a thug, somebody who lifts you up, elevates you, has to have a vision of the horizon. This guy has no horizon. He's sitting there with a dagger, stabbing everybody near him. That's who he is. He's not standing on a hill and pointing at something and saying, we can go there. He doesn't need to. He's got people to his right who are saying, what Israel is? Israel is everything all the way to the border with Iran.
On that note, actually, because this is something I've thought about a lot over the last year, I think Netanyahu serves a similar function to liberals in the West that Trump does for Americans, and that he's the boogeyman that you can really blame any kind of bad actions on. It's not Zionism, it's not Israel, it's Netanyahu that is this bad actor. When in reality, anybody paying attention has seen over the last year, especially just how bloodthirsty and awful and right wing. I don't want to say all of Israel, but a large majority of the Zionist thought goes. What is, if you had to guess, with Netanyahu gone, what does that do for, I guess, the PR of liberal Zionism in the West? Where do they go from there, that they don't have that boogeyman?
Let's break this into a couple of elements. Yeah. First, let's take the liberal Zionist intelligentsia. It has collapsed. The career of what's his name, Peter Beinart, is actually indicative of this collapse. He is a classic liberal Zionist who has marched as far as he could go, keeping liberalism and Zionism together. And he has gone, I think, to his credit, he has held to some elements of liberalism and found Zionism exasperating. There are other liberal Zionists who have abandoned liberalism for Zionism. Because these two things, Zionism as it is now and liberalism, are incompatible. You cannot be a liberal Zionist anymore. These are incompatible. There was space for it, even maybe up to 2014. I read an interview with the editor of Jewish Currents, which was quite interesting. It's not a liberal magazine. It's a kind of Occupy Wall Street Zionism, kind of magazine. Maybe not Zionism even. But they marched after 2014, that magazine, which was started by Yiddish-speaking communists a long time ago, changed its name and so on. That magazine sort of moves after 2014, the attack on the Palestinians 2014, moves away from Zionism. So these examples show you the incompatibility. I mean, after 2014, and I know somebody like myself will say, listen, why 2014? I mean, we knew this in the 80s, that this attack on the Palestinians was vicious and, the blah, blah, blah. Okay, I don't care really. I mean, I'm talking about now. Yeah. The break for at least this generation of people who are under 50. The 2014 attack on the Palestinians was quite grotesque. The attack on the Great March of Return 2019 was really quite stunning for people. And then Zionism and liberalism become more and more incompatible. And that's because of what happened to Zionism. Zionism became much, much more intolerant to any kind of internal conversation. It's like my ride or die is Israel. That's it. No criticism allowed, and so on. Any criticism is anti-Semitism. Even Zionists can be anti-Semites, and so on. That direction of Zionism actually lost its liberals because it was forcing them to basically become Netanyahuites. There's no room. It is what I said earlier, substitutionism. Netanyahu unfortunately substituted for Israel, which substituted for Zionism, which substituted for Judaism, which substituted for Jews. And that chain of substitutionism means if you are Jewish, you have to support Netanyahu. And that direction of Zionism, or that compulsion, that demand upon people, was exhausting. And I don't think people like Peter Beinart and so on could go there. And so they had several crises. I saw this among friends of mine, who were willing to discuss from a Zionist perspective, what used to be a liberal Zionist perspective, the problems with the occupation. But then Zionism became intolerable for them. It wasn't the critique of Zionism that became intolerable, and they walk away. And I find that very interesting. So that's one piece of it. And I don't think these people have found a home. I think they are, in a sense, homeless. They are unable to find a real political home. And I feel terrible about that, because they are not able to become anti-Zionists. They can't break with it completely. So they are, without a home, and that's tough. And I think then there is the issue of what has happened within Israel. Friends of mine who are on the left inside Israel have for years cautioned about the direction of Israeli society, the difficulties, the debates that went on between, say, Orthodox Jews and secular Jews about things like riding buses, gender segregation. Those things went on mute, and the principal issue became the Palestinian threat. And previously there had been these internal debates and disputes inside Israel, but the quote unquote Palestinian threat muted a lot of these debates and discussions, and kind of corrupted them into the direction of, why don't the Orthodox join the military? Put your Judaism to the test, go and defend Israel with a gun. That sort of thing became the demand, which was different from a lighter debate, which is, why can't you sit anywhere in the bus together? Or why should there be separate buses? Those debates, which at a time went to mute. And Israeli society became a more difficult place to be critical of the occupation. What happened to B'Tselem and other, let's be clear, these are basic liberal human rights groups. These are not left-wing groups. People I've engaged with from, these groups, they are basic liberals. They got criminalized, okay? They got told you are outside the family of civil society. That's harsh, man. Their offices were raided. People are arrested. That's harsh, okay? What were they saying that was outside the bound of civil society? They were saying things like, here's the Geneva Convention, here's international law, here's the state behavior. That's a problem. Okay, these are basic liberals. Illegal, tough, yeah? I think all of this kind of crisis had a bearing on US college campuses over the last 500 days. I think for young Jewish students, Jewish American students on US college campuses, where my children, one studied, already gone, and one is studying, I think this was a serious problem for Zionism, because I was invited during the course of this year to a number of schools to lecture by the Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP. Almost all the invitations came from SJP, from Vassar College on one side to the Claremont colleges on the other. I went to a number of colleges around the country. Almost all the SJPs, half the kids involved Jewish. Half the kids involved, Jewish Americans, half of them. They are not joining necessarily Jewish Voice for Peace. They may also be members of JVP or, Not in My Name, I think it's called, or In My Name, something like that. But they were in SJP and they were heartsick. They were ill, actually. They felt ill. And I felt really bad for them. They felt ill for being Jewish, for being persecuted by their institutions, for getting help from family members. Why? Because they felt that this genocide must end. They couldn't balance what they felt was the reality happening in Gaza with how they were being persecuted by their institutions, by some people in their family and community. This is going to take time. It's going to take time for people to get through this. It's going to take time for what it means to be Jewish in the United States. It's not going to be easy to settle this. It's going to take a long time of a lot of internal debate. And because liberal Zionism doesn't really exist, there is no Peter Beinart to advise you. There are no real voices in that space, like the Nazi courts and so on. There are no important Jewish voices that have appeared in that space. That provide a kind of intellectual and mentoring leadership. It just doesn't seem to have occurred yet. It's going to come, but it hasn't. I can't see it yet. Maybe I'm not looking in the right places. Maybe it's emerging. I just don't see it.
I want to pivot back to the Western Hemisphere, Vijay, and really talk about the Trump administration's policy towards Central and South America. Really, immigration was obviously a major focus of his campaign. And also in the last Trump administration, we saw the calling for the overthrow of the Maduro government in Venezuela. Just really gives a broad overview of what you think, the policy towards Central and South America will be.
Firstly, I just want to say that I know Marco Rubio has problems with me and wrote a letter to the Justice Department asking me to be investigated and so on. I just want to say, Marco, now you're the Secretary of State. Let's just turn a new leaf and, let's forget all of that. And, you can do an investigation. That's okay. But I mean, now little Marco is big Marco because he's the Secretary of State. I mean, if Trump can bring you in, Marco, surely you can let go of your animosity towards me. Yeah. Just to put it,
if he can forgive Trump, he can forgive you.
Yeah, and if Trump can let him go, I mean, he's bringing him into a big role. I was a little surprised that at his confirmation, Rubio came through 99-0. I mean, not one liberal-leaning senator, not even the senator from Vermont, cast a no vote for his confirmation. There is something painful to see the United States Senate, which has an advise and consent role, and so on. I didn't watch the inauguration, but I watched a little bit of his hearing. Not one senator really grilled him, and not one senator voted against him. That means that he has come to his position. I know there's a tradition and this. What is the point of a vote if there's a tradition? If there's a tradition for everybody to vote to confirm, why have a vote? Why announce the result? Why not just say he's been confirmed? Yeah, it's like a voice vote. Why do the head count? The only reason to do the head count is for somebody to say, I don't agree with this decision. I think he's temperamentally not suited for this. He is on the record calling for the overthrow of many governments in Latin America. Bad idea. He's called for the overthrow of the government of Iran. Bad idea. Does this mean that Mr. Trump is in fact prepared to, have a policy in the next period until he fires Marco Rubio to overthrow these governments? I mean, I would have at least asked that question. Like, is this appointment an indicator to the US Senate that Mr. Trump proposes to use covert means to overthrow at least 3 governments? Or is Mr. Trump proposing to go to war with these countries without seeking a war powers resolution from the Congress? Yeah, I would have asked him that question because he's on the record, as saying, but nobody. Well, what's going on with the caliber of the senators. I don't know about you guys, but I was like, come on,
I think my thought on that, I guess if I were to opine on it, is I feel like that is part of a broader project for Democrats to sort of finger wag about other appointments that they find more outside the norm. The RFK Juniors, the Tulsi Gabbards, the whoever. Everyone was humming and hawing about those appointees. But then Marco Rubio, who has just a absolutely disgusting record, is like not a single person was like, what did you get? Well, I disagree with him on this or that, but he is fully qualified to, because apparently, the job of the Secretary of State is to overthrow as many governments as possible. But that would be my guess.
The first thing is I'm going to come back to, the question about Central America and so on, but I just want to defend RFK Jr. here, because my position with Mr. Kennedy is go have at him, as they say in somewhere in my bad American accent, go have at him. Yeah, go for it, Kennedy. Take on the food industry and the pharma industry and go after the red dye 59 or whatever the hell it's called.
Hey, he's not
Enjoy.
all bad.
If he's going to go screw up big food, some of that stuff in grocery stores should be banned. It's like cocaine, man. It's addiction. I go into the grocery store in Santiago and I see all these American snacks and I'm not thinking, tasty. I'm thinking I'm going to just overturn this bag of Cheetos onto my face, with the orange dust. It's cocaine. What is it doing in the food aisle? Yeah, it should be in a pharmacy somewhere, sold as drugs. So have at him, as they say, RFK. I don't know anything about Mr. Kennedy. I know his wife is a super actress and was in Curb Your Enthusiasm, which I love. She played Larry David's wife in that. She was amazing. Such a funny show. Best episode on American TV on Israel-Palestine relations. The fried chicken episode. Yeah. Amazing.
Agreed.
Well, Mr. Rubio wants to overthrow the governments of Venezuela and Cuba. And he might even try to do it. This is going to pose some challenges. Venezuela's closest partner politically is Russia. This is going to pose a challenge. I don't think the Russians are going to be willing to see the overthrow of the government in Venezuela. They have already lost an important ally in the Middle East, in Syria. I don't know if they're going to stomach two of these losses. So Mr. Trump, who I think is going to try to settle something with the Russians, may not want to actually pick another fight in Venezuela. Cuba is interesting. Right before Mr. Trump came back into office, the Chinese government sent an enormous shipment of electrical equipment to Cuba to help the electricity grid. This was as much to help the electricity grid as a message to Washington. It's the biggest shipment of Chinese goods to the Cubans. I don't know what message the Chinese are sending to Cuba, but perhaps they are saying to the Cubans that, to the United States, that I don't think you should try to overthrow this government. Mr. Trump, in fact, in all his presidential statements and executive orders that he signed, he actually didn't go after the Chinese much, because I think they've done their studies. I just read a report recently that Chinese vulnerability to these tariffs might be only 2% of the Chinese economy. Because in this last decade, China has really built up its independence from reliance on US high tech, really built it up. There are areas of vulnerability. They continue to be, for the short term, vulnerable to high quality tiny chips, which they bring in from overseas, some of it imported from Taiwan. Everybody imports it from Taiwan. But I don't think the vulnerability is as strong. There's a report that comes out from Australia about high tech, the most advanced productive forces. China has about 7 of 10 of them, more than the United States. So they are not as vulnerable to tariffs as the US consumer would be. So I think Mr. Trump, for all of that talk, I love tariffs, is a great word, that may have just been part of his bluster. Because if you go back and you look at the executive orders, yeah, there's all kinds of harsh stuff, transgender, yeah, this, that, and the other. But hey, Mr. Big Talker, you're going after teenage kids. What about China? You talk so big now, you just can't move on it because you realize that put tariffs on China. It's not going to hurt China. It's going to hurt US consumers, which is largely his base, because this is, everything in Walmart, everything in the dollar store, everything, Sam's Club, this club, that club, it's Chinese. So by all means, go ahead, put tariffs. The Chinese are not so reliant on the US market as they used to be. They are selling now to South America, to Africa, other parts of Asia. Australia is one of the big, these are all markets for them. It'll hurt the Chinese, no doubt about that. You put tariffs, it's going to hurt, but the hurt is very much less than it would have been even in Trump 1. Because Biden, unfortunately, as Trump 2, if they had played good cop, bad cop, if Biden had said no more sanctions on China, we're all open, and the Chinese would have let their guard down, then they might have enhanced the reliance on and then Trump comes in with the uppercut. But no, you see, they kept putting the pressure on, and the Chinese weren't going to sit back and take it. So they built their own fortifications economically, and then the United States is stuck. China is responsible for 10% of global military spending. United States is responsible for over 50%. This is a huge drag on the US economy. Yeah, well, you can tariff any country you want. The burden is going to come on your consumers.
Vijay, I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about BRICS. And, as we think about China, as we think about, South America, as we think about, anything to a counterweight to, US hegemony, how do you think that they will evolve, if they will evolve under Trump, and how do you think he will confront them? I think he recently confused Spain to be a BRICS country.
I mean, I forgive him for that. People always struggle with geography all around the world. Yeah, I mean, it's painful because, you go on Instagram and there's always these reels of somebody asking people on the street, what's a country in Africa which starts with R? And people say all kinds of ridiculous things. It pains me, but that has to do with global education on geography. So I don't want to put that particular one on Trump. Here's the interesting thing. Mr. Rubio, on a television interview, once said that this whole business of moving away from the dollar is terrible because the more countries that reduce reliance on the dollar, use of the dollar, it's harder to sanction them. He said it outright on a television program, which obviously is true, but I'd never actually heard somebody so senior and now Secretary of State say it outright. Like, we really want you to keep using the dollar so that we can put the screws on you. That's really what he was saying. So it is true that after the collapse of, or rather after the world financial crisis, which was really an Atlantic financial crisis, 2007, yeah, when the banks went crazy after the housing market went dreary. We argue in our institute that the West goes into a third Great Depression. If you look at growth rates in Europe and the US after 2007, they never really recover. And then, there's the pandemic, there's the Ukraine war. But in fact, there is this sort of toothache of very low growth rates from 2007. So the countries in Asia, and then the large country in South America, Brazil, to some extent Mexico, and then Nigeria and South Africa all began to think, how are we going to manage these big economies that we have if we're going to have to be exporting to countries with a growth rate of 1 or 2%? So they start to trade with each other. And in fact, BRICS, born in 2009, was largely to revive South-South trade. It was a commercial enterprise. It wasn't really political, and then they have very strategically enlarged because they've enlarged building on all the countries that produce mainly petroleum or natural gas. The BRICS, the OPEC plus is well represented in the enhanced BRICS. You got Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, all these countries in the BRICS plus. And now with the addition of countries like Indonesia, it's one of the largest economies in the world, you've got almost all the world's nickel within the BRICS bloc. So in an interesting way, these countries are major producers of of energy, of the materials for both fossil fuel and for electric. I mean, these are the principal countries that are now being brought into BRICS. I mean, if Venezuela had been brought in earlier last year, you would have almost all the world's oil inside the BRICS Plus. But Brazil effectively vetoed Venezuela's entry. In the next round, I think Venezuela will come into the BRICS. So this BRICS project is a pretty strategic project of trying to now start negotiating from strength with the G7, which has really been the objective. You know, these are countries that are growing super fast. What are the countries with the fastest growth rates in the world per capita, PPP even? China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, you know, Indonesia, India. These countries are growing 5, 6, 7%. You know, growth rate. United States, you have a good year, it's 3%. Yeah, you have a good year, it's 3%. It's just not growing. I mean, there's not much investment and so on. So the BRICS are a presence, a feature, but they haven't become a political adversary of anybody because they are largely still commercial and largely still about trade and development. Yeah, so they are not a political adversary. I mean, you know, the NATO countries are a military pact. They have a military pact. Even Russia and China don't have a military pact. They have a strategic alliance. A strategic alliance doesn't ensure that if you are at war, the other has to come to assist you. That is why China is not helping Russia in Ukraine. These countries don't even have a strategic alliance inside BRICS. You know, they just have trade relations, increased trade, and they have a development project together and so on. But they are building their own institutions. And that's what Marco Rubio picked up on. They are building their institutions, their own network to send money, their own monetary fund, their own banking system, and so on. And that's the real threat, that countries that are growing with huge surpluses are building their institutions, and countries that used to dominate everything are not growing, and their institutions will become essentially secondary or irrelevant.
Vijay, I know we're almost at time, and I was just wondering if you could just stay on for a final question for us to talk about Democrat failures in the 2024 election.
I mean, what is there to say, honestly? Like, failure of the Democrats wasn't in this election. They couldn't have done anything. Yeah. The failure of the Democrats was the first election against Trump. Because, you see, at that time, Mr. Sanders was able to galvanize a very large constituency of people who were angry with the situation in the country. Yeah. He sort of picked up the steam from, you know, Occupy, to some extent, early Black Lives Matter and so on. And he brought this big coalition to bear on US politics, not just on the Democratic Party, on the US political world. Yeah. And if Mr. Sanders had received the backing, instead of, if he had been sabotaged by the Democratic Party, if he had been allowed to build this upsurge, he would have outflanked the right. You see, but by the old Democratic Leadership Council, the Clintonians and others, sabotaging Sanders and then disciplining him, they basically gave the vector of critique to the right. And having given the whole vector of critique to the right, they appeared tired, which they are, and status quo. And Trump was able to, in fact, absorb a lot of that energy. May not be the same people. You see, the Sanders people might have left in disgust, but the vector of critique was with the right. And that vector of critique has remained with Trump. He remains a pole of critique. You see what I mean? And the Democrats could have done something different had they, which again is a class idiocy from a class perspective to say, if they had allowed, because their class position would never have permitted them to allow Sanders, you know, to create that lane and become the vector of critique from the left. The bourgeoisie in the United States is much more willing to allow the vector of critique from the right than from the left. And that's what the United States is going to have to live with for a very long time. That you've got the status quo politicians who basically are paralyzed and unable to move anything. They cannot inflame a base. All they can keep saying is Trump is terrible. That was Biden's campaign. That was Harris's campaign. I was saying at the time that it's a sad day for the United States when the lesser evil spells genocide. A really sad day. But the right they have trademarked the vector of critique, that they own it now. They have the language, they have the Joe Rogans, the this, the that. I mean, look at the audiences. You guys should have an audience of millions. Yeah, you won't. You won't, because the vector of critique has departed from you, has gone rightward. There is no political authorization for the things we are talking about. We are in that sense way outside the space of debate and discussion. And that is why I would say there is no way the Democrats could have done anything different this last year. They stood as the status quo against critique. And in this context where people are suffering so badly, critique was going to triumph, especially backed by the amount of money and so on. But it's not like the Democrats didn't bring money to the table into the elections. They just were tired. Yeah, a lot of money, but they were tired. I mean, it was tiring. And so it wasn't like Biden should have left early. That stuff is, to my mind, interesting, but leave that discussion to the boring old sods at MSNBC.
Vijay, thank you so much for your time. Is your book Washington Bullets based on the Clash song? Washington Bullets?
The title is, of course, from the Clash song.
One of my favorite Clash songs. Yes, so good.
Yeah, super song.
And that was our interview with Vijay Prashad.
Thanks for watching, everybody. This is Villain for All Seasons. I'm Dan.
I'm Ben.
Andrew.
Villain for All Seasons. Please like and subscribe, share, and we'll catch you next time.